Hello friends, welcome to Coding Host YouTube channel. In this video, I will explain you a Leetcode problem, set matrix zeros. So in this question, we will have a m into n integer matrix, and if n element is 0, then we have to set its entire row and column to zeros. So you can see here in this example 1, this is our matrix in which we have 0 in the middle. So this is our second column and this is our second row. So in the second row and the second column, we have to make all the elements as 0. So this is our output matrix. Same you can see here in this example 2, we have this matrix. So you can see here this 0 is present in first row and first column. So this whole first row and first column will become 0, and this second 0 is also present in first row, but it is present in the last column. So whole first row and last column will become 0. So for this question, I will explain you two approaches. First is brute force approach and second is optimized approach. But in this video, I will only going to explain you the brute force approach. But there is one limitation of that brute force approach. You can see here the range of elements in this matrix. So it is starting from negative to positive. So that brute force approach is only applicable for positive elements. So that's why we cannot use that brute force approach to write the program for this question in the Leetcode, but only for interview. That if in the interview they will tell you that the matrix will only have positive elements, then you can apply that approach. That's why I will explain you the brute force approach in this video. So you can see here I have taken here some sample test cases. So this is our test case 1. First we will see the approach and then we will write the program. So what I will do is, we already know how we can traverse in a matrix. So we know that we have to take two for loops. So first for loop is for the rows, and then inside this for loop we have another for loop for the columns. So using this for loop we can easily traverse in the matrix to every element. Then what we are going to do, so you can see this test case 1, we are traversing in the matrix. So this 0 is present at index 1 comma 1. So what I will do is, at this index we will call a function that mark this row and column with 0. So suppose if you find 0 and then you just mark this row and column with 0, what will happen? So when we are on the index 1 by 1, so we are calling a function to make this row and column as 0. So then this row and column will become 0. But you can see here we are not going to stop this for loop because we don't know if we have more 0 in the matrix or not. So next time when this loop will run again, so we will reach at index 1 comma 2. So you can see here when we reach 1 comma 2 at this index, so here it will again find element 0. So then it will again call that method to make this row and column as 0. So you can see that because of that this column will also become 0. So this is wrong. So what we are going to do is, initially we are not marking the row and column as 0. We will mark them as negative. So we will mark them as -1. So you can see that suppose this was our matrix, and when we are finding 0 here, so we are marking this whole row and column as -1. So you can see here we also have to use a if statement when we are marking the row and column as 0, because at the index where we are finding the original 0, we have to keep it as 0. We do not have to mark it as -1. When we reach on the last index and this nested for loop will break, then after that we will use the next nested for loops to check that if we find any -1 element, we will make it as 0. So next time we will use nested for loops again to make this negative ones to 0. So this is our brute force approach. So this is all our sample test case. I will write the program in the IntelliJ IDEA and I will run all these test cases to check that if the brute force approach is working or not. So now let's write the program. So you can see that in the program this is our matrix. Then we have to use nested for loops. So for int I equal to 0 and I less than a dot length and I plus plus, and inside this we have to use a next for loop for int j equal to 0 and j less than a of 0 dot length and j plus plus. So now we have to use a if statement here. If array of I and j equal to 0, so when we are finding any element as 0, so then we have to call a function. So I will make a function here, set matrix minus. So we know that initially we do not have to mark row and column as 0, we have to mark them negative. So I will name this function as set matrix minus, and inside this function we will pass array and this I and j, because this I and j will tell us that which row and which column we have to mark. After that, here I will make a function public static void, so we do not have to return anything, we only have to mark this original array with negative elements. So that's why we will use here void return type. Method name is set matrix minus. So now in this method I will make this parameters array a and int column and int row. So here you can see that one thing, that this I for loop is for rows and this j for loop is for column. But you can see here, when I am passing these values, here I am storing this I in the column variable and I am storing this variable j in the row variable. Why? So I will tell you later why we are doing this. So now in this method we have to take two for loops, first for making the row as -1 and second for making the column as -1. So for int I equal to 0 and I less than a dot length and I plus plus. So here I will use a if statement. If a of I and row not equal to 0. So we know that we do not have to make this original 0 as -1. So using this first for loop we are marking that column as -1. So array of I and row equal to -1, and after that we have to make a next for loop to change the row to -1. For int I equal to 0 and I less than array of 0 dot length and I plus plus. So here you can see that in the starting we are taking a dot length, but here we have to take a 0 dot length. For column we have to take a of 0 dot length. You can see that we have to make some changes here in the if statement. If so, you can see that what we have to write here first, column or I. Suppose if we have to move in this whole row from this here to here, so actually what is changing here, the value of this row will remain same, only the value of column is changing here. So actually this column variable which is changing, this is our variable I, and this row variable, it is our column variable. So that's how we have to write. So if a of column and I not equal to 0, so then we have to make it as 0. So a of column and I equal to 0. So we have to make that column and I equal to -1. So you can see that what we are doing right now, we have written this nested for loop to traverse in the matrix. So traverse in matrix. Then what we are doing is we are calling this set matrix minus function to make that element row and column as -1 where we are finding 0. So this is our method. So this first for loop is for making column as -1 and this second for loop is for making the row as -1. You can see that we also have to make that -1 back to 0. But before that we will see that if this method is working fine or not, if it is making row and column as -1 or not. So I will print the elements of our array, and now let's run this program. So you can see that this method is working fine. We had 0 in the center, so this whole column is -1 here and here, and this row is also has become -1. So now only the one step remain is that we have to make this -1 back to 0. So before printing this array, I will use this nested for loops here, and inside this, so here I will write if statement. If array of I and j equal to -1, then array of I and j equal to 0, and we are using this next for loop to print our matrix. So now let's run this program. So you can see that this program is working fine. We are getting this second row and second column as 0 and 0. So I will show you a quick dry run of this program. So let's see how this program is working. So you can see that in the question we have a matrix of 3 by 3, and in the second row and the second column at this index we have 0. So we have to make this whole column and row as 0. So then what we are doing is we are traversing in the matrix using the nested for loops. So this first for loop will start from index I. So I is 0. Inside it we have this next for loop j. So j will also start from index 0. So you can see that at index 0 and 0 it will check that if we have 0, you can see no, at this index 0 and 0 we have 1. So then nothing will happen, j will increment, so it will become 1. Then it will check at index 0 and 1, do we have 0? You can see at index 0 and 1 we have 1. So this if statement is false, then j will increment, so it will become 2. You can see at this index 0 and 2 we have 1. Again this if statement is false, then you can see j will not increment because in the matrix we only have 3 columns. Then this row will increment, so I will become 1. So now again j will start from 0. Now it will check at index 1 and 0. Now it will check if at index 1 and 0 do we have 0. You can see at index 1 and 0 we have 1. Again this if statement is false, j will become 1. Now you can see here at index 1 and 1 we have 0. Yes. Now this if statement will execute and it will call this set matrix minus function. So here we are passing these 3 parameters. First is array, then these 2 values I and j. So in the column variable we will store I and I is 1, and in the row variable we will store j and j is also 1. So now what will happen, you can see we have this first for loop, and in this first for loop we have 2 values I and row. So this I is starting from 0. So this is our I is starting from 0, but this row variable will remain as it is and row is 1. So index 0 and 1. So it will check that if at this index do we have 0. You can see no. So this condition is right. Here we have 1. So we will make it as -1. Then I will increment, so it will become 1. Then it will check at this index 1 and 1. At this index we have 0. So this if statement is not going to execute here. Then I will increment, so it will become 2. You can see at index 2 and 1 we have 1. It will make this index element as -1. So here it will become -1. Then index will become 3. So then this for loop will break here. So this for loop will stop here. Then this next for loop will start. So this first for loop has made our second column as -1. Now this next for loop will make this second row as -1. This for loop will start from 0. So this is our I, which is starting from 0, and we have this column variable. So here we have column variable which is 1. So it will check this first index 1 and 0. So at index 1 and 0, is the element not equal to 0? You can see yes, here element is 1. So we will make it as -1. So it will become -1. Then I will increment, so it will become 1. You can see at index 1 and 1 we have 0. So this if statement is false and it will not execute. Then I will increment, so it will become 2. At index 1 and 2 we have 1. So this if statement is right and it will execute, so we will make this element as -1. So after that I will increment. You can see that in the matrix we only have 3 column. So then this for loop will also break from here. So then we will go back in this nested for loops. So in the last we were at this index 1 and 1. Index will increment, so j will increment, it will become 2. Now it will check if at index 1 and 2 do we have 0. So you can see that now this is our array. We have modified our array by making the elements as -1. So now you can see here at index 1 and 2 element is 0. No, here we have -1. So here nothing will happen. But you can see here if initially we have made this whole row and column as 0. So next time this function will again make this column as 0, which will make our output false. So this time nothing going to happen. Then j will increment, so it will become 3, and we know that then this j for loop will break. Then I will increment, so it will become 2. Now from here j will again start from 0. At index 2 and 0 we have 1. So this if statement is false, then j will become 1. At index 2 and 1 we have -1. Again this if statement is false, nothing going to happen. Then j will become 2. So at index 2 and 2 we have 1. Again this if statement is false. So in the last this both nested for loops will break. So you can see that this next nested for loops will start. So it will start from index 0. So we are using this next nested for loops to making this -1 element as 0. So you can see that I will start from 0 and j will also start from 0. So at index 0 or 0 do we have -1? No, nothing going to happen. Then j will increment. Then it will check if at index 0 and 1 do we have -1. You can see yes. So it will make this element as 0. Then j will increment, so it will become 2. So at index 0 and 2 do we have -1? No, nothing going to happen. Then I will increment, so it will become 1. Again j will start from 0. So at index 1 and 0 do we have -1? You can see yes. So we will make this element as 0. Then j will increment, so it will become 1. You can see at index 1 and 1 we have 0, nothing going to happen. Then j will increment, so it will become 2. So at index 1 and 2, at 1 and 2 we have -1. Yes. So this if statement is right, and then it will make this element as 0. So after that I will increment, so it will become 2, and j will start from 0. At index 2 and 0 we have 1, nothing going to happen. Then j will increment, so it will become 1. So at index 2 and 1 we have -1, yes. So then it will make this element as 0. Then after that j will become 2. So at index 2 and 2 we have 1, nothing going to happen. And in the last this for loops will also break, and then we will print our matrix. So this is our final output. This second row and second column has become 0. So if you want to know the time and space complexity of this program, so what is that? We are using nested for loops. So because of that, time complexity of this program will be big of n square. So you can see that we are only using this for loops, but we are not making the exact same array to make the changes. So because of that, phase complexity of this program will be big of 1. So in the next video I will explain you the optimized approach for this question. Thanks for watching.